Sexy CEO paid her to fake for one night at his sister's wedding. But she stole his heart forever. He paid her to pretend for $15,000 and one night. She took the job to save her business. At a vineyard wedding, she stood beside him while guests quietly guessed the truth. Veronica, his ex, stood and named the lie. The room stops. Her cheeks burn. He watches her and stays silent. Did any of their touches mean more than a script? Will she walk away, or will he risk everything to prove the feelings were real? Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. Shaw Edwards sat behind the glass that caught the late afternoon sun and turned the city into a gold mirror. He had learned to think in margins and percentages. The numbers were tidy, reliable. Today, a slim envelope lay beside his tablet. Elisa's wedding invitation. He could feel the assumptions collecting around it like dust. Questions at family dinners, colleagues' small talk, the expectation that success should look married. He had answers for every boardroom challenge, but none for the private ones. He could have refused. He could have shown up solo and brushed off the comments with a joke about work. He'd done that before. Instead, he rubbed his temples and gave a different order. Find someone who could stand beside me and look wrong to no one. His executive assistant raised an eyebrow and made a list without a second thought. Shaw wanted discretion, competence, and someone who could hold a conversation under pressure. He wanted a person who would fit a frame, not complicate his schedule. Across town, Anna Moore was on her knees in an event space, taping a runner to a polished floor. She had a clipboard, a rolling case of samples, and 3 overdue invoices reminding her that talent didn't pay rent. Her company was small but proud. She built it from empty rooms and late nights, but a recent client had pulled funding, and she'd spent the last month juggling unpaid vendors and hopeful emails. When her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize, she assumed it was another vendor chasing payment. Instead, it was an offer that sounded like a joke. One evening, 50 miles away, $15,000. They met in a neutral place, a quiet suite in a boutique hotel chosen for privacy. Shaw's handshake was calm, deliberate. He spoke plainly, no flirtation, no small talk that hinted at something deeper. He explained the purpose. His sister's wedding carried family pressure he wanted to manage. The arrangement would be simple. Arrive together, mingle, take photos, leave when the evening did. Compensation would be immediate, expenses covered. He emphasized boundaries. This was not a relationship. It was a role with rules. Anna listened, folding details into a neat mental ledger. She had done work that required acting, coordinating emotions for a client's brand, coaching speakers to deliver the right tone, but this felt different. She asked practical questions. Wardrobe, timing, expected interactions. She wanted specifics because she relied on them. The assistant slipped a folder across the table. Schedule, talking points about family, brief notes on Shaw's background. A confidentiality agreement sat on top, legal language trimmed of drama. Payment upon signature. No public statements. Termination terms spelled out. Shaw watched her when she spoke. He noticed how she paused before answering, how her shoulders settled when she checked a detail twice. She was careful but not cautious in the timid way of someone afraid to fail. Rather deliberate, a professional who had learned to make precise moves to protect her work. He expected charm or weariness in exchange for the fee. She traded competence and an unexpected steadiness that unsettled him. For the first time in months, the lens he pointed at others refused to explain the small things stirring inside him. They negotiated the edges of the agreement like professionals. Anna requested a clause that guaranteed payment even if the assignment were cut short. She asked for clear limits on physical contact and a safety net if anything crossed a line. Shaw agreed without hesitation. He made a point of making the terms simple and final. No gray areas. He did not ask for her phone details or social media access. He did not demand rehearsals beyond a short briefing. Their signatures were practical, clean. He slid her a check, and the assistant scheduled a single preparatory meeting before departure. What neither of them said in the room that day was how much each would rehearse in private. Anna mapped out possible conversational paths, topics to raise with family members, simple anecdotes that would sound plausible, ways to deflect when curiosity pried too deeply. She practiced posture, the angle of a wrist, the easy laugh that signals familiarity without revealing intimacy. Shaw, for his part, refreshed his prepared lines about childhood memories and favorite restaurants, stories that would fit into the evening without exposing the parts of him he kept locked. On the drive up the coast to the vineyard, Anna ran through potential wardrobe options out loud to herself while checking photos on her phone. She chose a dress that said elegance without excess, something she could move in and still feel like herself. Shaw reviewed the guest list and photos of family members, making note of potential conversational minefields. Neither spoke much between logistics. The silence was professional, not cold. It was the kind of quiet two people keep when they are both focused on a task. Small acts began to matter. He held a door open, and she caught the sleeve of his jacket with a practiced brush of fingers that did not linger. He introduced her to Elise as someone he'd been seeing. No flourish, no elaboration. She answered questions with a calm that came from years of coordinating moments. She turned attention from the couple and placed it where it belonged without seeming to try. They moved through the rehearsal as two people filling assigned roles, and the performance held. Yet gestures pulled at reality like a tug on a seam. On his phone during a brief pause, Shaw found a photo of himself and his sister from years ago. Two young faces less guarded, and he felt a small private ache at the idea of pretending when maybe what he feared was true, that he'd learned to manage life instead of living it. Anna, watching him watch the past, felt a soft curiosity. She recognized the look of someone who had never allowed anyone to reorder his priorities. They agreed on signals, a hand on the lower back if a conversation needed steering, a nod to exit a room. They planned seating and photo spots, mapped where to sit for the family portraits, and chose the cottage where they would meet before the event began. Everything was scheduled. Still, when they stood together before the evening started, something had shifted that neither clause nor contract could capture. Anna signed the final page, slid the pen back to Shaw, and kept her hand for a moment longer than the paper required. She did not say she was staying for more than an evening. He did not ask. Each left with a checked box, and the quiet knowledge they'd begun something unplanned, and wondered why. The air in Santa Barbara was warm enough to hold the scent of wine and ocean salt together. The vineyard glowed under strings of soft light stretched across the courtyard. Cars rolled up the gravel path, one after another, until a sleek black sedan stopped near the entrance. Shaw stepped out first, his usual calm in place, but when Anna appeared behind him, every plan he'd made for the evening faltered. Her red gown caught the light like it was made for it. No jewelry competed with it. No hesitation showed in her step. Conversations dimmed for a moment as people glanced her way. Elise was the first to cross the space, smiling so wide her eyes crinkled. "So this is Anna," she said, pulling her into an embrace as though they were already friends. You're even prettier than Shaw's emails made you sound. Anna laughed, natural and easy. Even though the line wasn't true, there had been no emails. Shaw's jaw tightened at his sister's casual teasing, but Anna squeezed Elise's hand, rescuing him before he needed to speak. He doesn't say much, but he has good taste in wine, Anna replied. Elise laughed, immediately charmed. The family's attention shifted, and Shaw exhaled, quiet relief hidden behind a polite smile. Dinner began at a long table lined with candles. Shaw's father asked about Anna's work. His mother asked how they'd met. Anna answered smoothly, her story brief but believable. They met at a conference, both working late on separate projects that overlapped. She described his determination, his quiet humor, small things she'd observed in the short time they'd spent preparing. It sounded genuine because every detail she used was. Shaw watched her handle each question with calm precision. She didn't brag, didn't overperform. When someone interrupted, she let them. When someone disagreed, she laughed softly and redirected. He'd hired someone to play a part, but what he got was a woman who understood how to disarm tension without losing herself. For once, he didn't feel like a man managing a public image. He felt like someone allowed to just exist. Halfway through dinner, he caught himself studying her, not her dress or her hair, but the small movements that made her real, the way she tucked a strand behind her ear when listening, how she shifted slightly toward whoever spoke to show attention. When she turned and found him watching, she smiled faintly. He looked away, suddenly conscious of the rhythm of his own breathing. After dessert, as music filled the courtyard, couples drifted toward the patio for dancing. Elise called for a toast, her voice bright. She raised a glass to love, commitment, and the rare people who make us believe in both. Laughter followed, but Shaw's gaze stayed on Anna. When she lifted her glass, her fingers brushed his. For a moment, he forgot it was supposed to be choreography. They escaped the table soon after, a quiet retreat disguised as a stroll. The vineyard's paths curved between rows of vines heavy with fruit. Small lights ran along the fences, throwing soft gold onto the dirt. The hum of the dinner faded behind them. Anna kicked off her heels halfway down the path, carrying them in one hand. "You didn't tell me your family's weddings feel like movie premieres," she said. Shaw chuckled under his breath. "It's their way of proving we turned out all right." "You did," she said, looking up at him. "Maybe too right. Everything about you looks rehearsed." He stopped walking. "And you don't." She smiled. "I rehearse to survive. You rehearse to stay untouched." He had no response, not right away. She wasn't wrong. The control he used as armor had long stopped being about discipline. It was a wall built to keep people from seeing the things he hadn't fixed. He shoved his hands into his pockets and said quietly, "You make this feel too easy." She tilted her head, studying him in the dim light. "And you make pretending too hard." Silence hung there, not heavy, just precise. He looked at her like he was trying to memorize something he might lose. They walked further, talking about small things, her company, his work, how the vineyard kept its grapes cool with wind from the sea. The conversation moved easily, without effort. Somewhere between laughter and shared pauses, the space between them shrank. Their hands brushed, and neither of them corrected it. When they returned to the courtyard, the music had slowed. Elise waved them over for one last photo before guests began leaving. Shaw placed a hand lightly on Anna's back as the camera flash caught them together. It wasn't part of the plan, but it looked like it. After the guests dispersed, he drove her to the cottage the family had arranged for her stay. The car ride was quiet, not strained, but charged with everything unsaid. When they reached the door, she turned to him. "We did well tonight." "We did," he agreed, though his voice caught on the second word. Anna leaned against the doorway. "Your family loves you, Shaw. You could have come alone." He looked at her, unguarded for once. "I didn't want to." For the first time that night, she didn't have a prepared answer. She searched his face for the line between honesty and performance but couldn't find it. When she finally spoke, her tone was low. "Good night." He nodded. "Good night, Anna." The door closed softly between them. Inside the cottage, Anna let out a slow breath and set her shoes on the floor. She pressed her palms to her face, trying to shake the feeling that the evening had shifted something real inside her. The man who was supposed to be her client had looked at her as though she was the only thing steady in a room full of wealth and expectation. It scared her how much that mattered. Back at the main house, Shaw poured a glass of water and stood by the window. The vineyard was silent, except for the faint sound of waves breaking beyond the hills. He replayed the evening, her laugh, her quiet composure, the way she had handled every conversation like she'd been part of the family for years. He had paid for convenience, but what he felt now was anything but convenient. For the next few days, preparations for the wedding continued. Shaw and Anna found themselves paired for small errands, checking guest lists, confirming seating arrangements, rehearsing their arrival timing. What started as polite conversation began to slip into personal details. Anna spoke about her mother's garden, the place where she first learned patience. Shaw shared memories of losing his parents' marriage to silence. Their words filled the empty places neither had realized were still aching. The more time they spent together, the harder it became to maintain the act. Shaw noticed how she softened rooms when she entered, how people gravitated toward her warmth. Anna saw through his authority. She saw the man who stayed awake at 2 a.m. staring at old messages he never answered. On the last night before the wedding, Elise hosted a small gathering for close friends and family. Shaw stood beside Anna near the terrace rail as the sun sank low, turning the sky orange. "They think we're perfect together," she whispered. He turned slightly. "Do you?" Her eyes met his. "That's not part of the deal." He smiled, faint but real. "Maybe it should have been." She didn't respond. She didn't have to. The silence between them said enough. Too much, maybe. When she excused herself to leave, he watched her go, unsure whether to follow or stay. He didn't move. For the first time in years, he wasn't sure which version of himself was real. The one who had paid her to stand beside him, or the one who now wanted to stay there without paying for it. Outside, the vineyard lights flickered on. Somewhere in the distance, music drifted from the house. In the quiet between moments, both of them realized that pretending was already over. They just hadn't admitted it yet. The morning light spread across the vineyard in long bands, catching on the silver tables and soft white drapes fluttering in the breeze. It should have been a perfect day, Elisa's wedding, the one moment Shaw promised would go flawlessly. But perfection always came at a cost, and today it came wearing heels and a knowing smile. Veronica Hale stepped out of a black car as though she owned the ground it stopped on. Her sunglasses hid everything but that smirk, confident, practiced, and sharp enough to draw blood. The guests didn't know her yet, but Elise did. The maid of honor froze mid-sentence, her bouquet trembling slightly. "Veronica!" Elisa's voice cracked. "You weren't supposed to." "Oh, darling," Veronica said, removing her glasses and kissing the air near Elisa's cheek. "I couldn't miss your big day. You know how much I love family events." Her gaze slid past Elise and locked onto Shaw. He had been standing near the terrace, adjusting his cufflinks, but the moment their eyes met, his hands stopped moving. The last time he'd seen her had been in his office, 6 months ago, when she'd left him with a broken engagement ring and the words "you don't know how to love, only how to manage." She crossed the lawn toward him with the grace of someone walking into her own victory. "You look good, Shaw. Wedding suits you." He didn't answer. Behind him, Anna approached, her calm presence a steady contrast. She greeted Elise with a hug and smiled at Veronica, polite and unaware. "And who's this?" Veronica asked, tone honeyed. "This is Anna Moore," Shaw said carefully. "She's with me." Veronica's smile tightened. "With you? How efficient." She leaned closer, whispering near his ear. "So this is your new project." He stepped back slightly, his expression unreadable. "Veronica, don't start." "I wouldn't dream of it," she said, but the glint in her eye promised otherwise. Throughout the ceremony, she sat close enough to be noticed. When the vows were spoken, she tilted her head, mouthing a comment to a nearby guest. When Elise walked past, Veronica clapped twice as loud as everyone else, but her gaze never left Anna and Shaw. Anna tried to ignore her. She focused on the joy around her, the music, the people. But every time she looked toward the tables, she felt Veronica's eyes on her like heat through glass. Shaw noticed, too. His jaw remained tight, his shoulders tense. By the time dinner began, the tension was coiled so tightly around the evening that conversation felt forced. Anna smiled, answered questions, and helped Elise's mother with a dropped napkin. Shaw poured wine for guests who didn't need it, his every motion measured. Across the table, Veronica lifted her glass. She waited until everyone had settled, until the music dipped, until she had an audience. Then she stood. "I'd like to make a toast," she said sweetly. "To Elise and her husband, two people who know how to make love look effortless." Laughter rippled softly, unsure but polite. Shaw leaned back, his eyes narrowing. Veronica turned her gaze on him. "And to my dear friend Shaw," she continued, "it's nice to see you finally brought someone. Especially since the last time we talked, you swore you'd never fake love again." The laughter died. Forks paused mid-air. Anna blinked, her smile fading. "What does she mean?" she whispered. Shaw opened his mouth, but no words came. Veronica's grin widened. "Oh, didn't he tell you? He's very generous when it comes to appearances. I should know." She turned to the crowd, voice smooth and cruel. "He paid her to come. That's Shaw Edward. Everything's a transaction. Love included." Whispers rose immediately, spreading down the table like spilled wine. Faces turned. Some looked confused, others intrigued. Elise stood halfway up, eyes darting between her brother and her former friend. Anna's heartbeat pounded in her ears. She felt every stare on her skin. "Is that true?" she asked quietly. Shaw stood slowly. "Anna." The hesitation was enough. The single beat of silence between her question and his response screamed louder than any confession. Her chair scraped against the floor as she stood. "You paid me to lie," she said, voice steady even as her throat burned. "Don't worry, I'll finish the act." She turned before anyone could stop her. The gown that had made her radiant now felt like a costume. She walked through the murmurs, head high, until she reached the doors that led out into the cold night air. Behind her, Elise grabbed Veronica's arm. "What's wrong with you?" "Truth is a public service," Veronica said softly, pulling away. "He should thank me later." Shaw didn't move at first. He heard his name once, twice, from family members trying to intervene. But his focus was only on the door Anna had vanished through. The sound of it closing felt final. Elise's voice cut through the noise. "Shaw, go after her." He nodded once, almost dazed, and walked out without another word. Outside, the evening breeze carried the faint sound of music from the reception. Guests tried to return to laughter, to pretend nothing had broken, but inside Shaw, everything had. He found the gravel path leading toward the cottages, but no sign of her yet. The vineyard lights glowed dimly, distant and blurred. Every part of him wanted to fix the moment, to rewrite it, to stop the truth from sounding like a lie. But the words Veronica had used, "fake love again," echoed too perfectly, like they'd been waiting for this night. He stopped halfway down the path and pressed his palms to his eyes. Somewhere beyond the trees, Anna kept walking, each step heavier than the last. Inside, Veronica took her seat again, a faint smile curling her lips. The game was over. She'd won, for now. Music still floated through the air, but for Shaw, it may as well have stopped. He sat at the corner of the reception hall, surrounded by laughter that no longer reached him. His tie was loose, his drink untouched, and his eyes locked on the door Anna had walked through hours ago. Conversations blurred into static. Every clink of glass, every burst of laughter, felt miles away from where his mind was. Elise tried to approach him twice, but gave up after seeing his expression. Quiet, focused, hollow. Shaw Edward, the man known for composure, was unraveling silently in front of people who had no idea what to say. Veronica had left after her little victory, her perfume lingering in the air like smoke. Guests moved on, pretending everything was fine, but he couldn't. His world, built on structure, logic, control, was cracked open, and for once, there was no deal he could make to fix it. When the last song ended and people began to leave, Shaw stepped outside. The sky had opened up. Rain fell steadily across the vineyard, washing away the traces of the evening. He walked without an umbrella, following the path that wound through the vines toward the guest cottages. Water soaked his shirt, clung to his skin, and blurred the lights ahead. He didn't care. Somewhere down that path was Anna. He found her near the end of the trail, sitting on a low stone wall, shoes off, the hem of her gown dark with mud. Her hair was damp, her makeup streaked, but she was still the most striking thing he'd ever seen. For a moment, he just stood there, afraid that if he spoke, she'd disappear. "Anna!" His voice was rough, almost a whisper. She didn't turn. "You shouldn't be here. I need to explain." "Explain what?" She finally looked up, eyes red but fierce. "That you were too proud to come alone? That you hired me to make your life look perfect? I know what I agreed to, Shaw, but I didn't agree to being humiliated." He stepped closer, rain dripping from his hair. "I didn't know she would." "That's not the point," she cut in. "You didn't deny it. You just stood there while she told everyone I was for sale." "I froze," he said quietly. "Not because she was right, but because I didn't know how to stop her without making it worse." She shook her head. "You're always managing outcomes. Always thinking in damage control. But this isn't a company crisis, Shaw. It's me." The words hit harder than anything Veronica had said. He moved another step forward, but she stood before he could reach her. Her bare feet splashed in puddles, the red fabric of her dress clinging to her legs. "I thought you were different," she said, voice trembling. "You made me believe I mattered, not as some image, but as a person." "You do matter," he said instantly, desperate, sincere. You have since the first day. Then why couldn't you just tell them the truth? I was trying to protect you. Her laugh was soft, bitter. No. You were protecting yourself. You can't stand being the man who makes mistakes. That's why you bought a lie instead of risking something real. He wanted to argue, but she was right. Every decision he'd made had been about control. The contract, the act, even his silence, it all came from fear. Fear of being seen, of being human. He reached for her hand, but she stepped back. I was hired for one night, Shaw, she said, voice breaking. Consider the job done. She turned away, walking barefoot down the path. Rain ran down her arms, thunder rolling low in the distance. He stood there, helpless, watching her shrink into the darkness. Every instinct told him to chase her, to grab her hand, to make her stay. But for once, he didn't. He couldn't buy his way out of this one. When she disappeared into the vineyard's shadows, the silence that followed was unbearable. He sat on the wall she'd left, the same spot she'd occupied minutes ago. Rain fell harder now, soaking him completely. He ran his hands through his hair, pressed his palms together, and exhaled shakily. You idiot, he whispered to himself. For the next hour, he stayed there, replaying every moment since she walked into his life. The first meeting in the hotel suite, the dinner with his family, the way she laughed when Elise teased him. Every smile, every quiet look, felt like a confession he hadn't recognized until it was too late. Inside the house, lights flickered off one by one. Staff began clearing tables, the last traces of celebration fading. Elise found him eventually, wrapped in a shawl, carrying an umbrella he didn't use. She stopped when she saw his face. She left, didn't she? She asked. He nodded slowly. Good, she said, surprising him. Maybe now you'll stop pretending that control fixes everything. He frowned. You sound like her. She sounds right. Elise sighed, lowering the umbrella. You've spent your whole life building walls to make people think you're untouchable. Anna got in anyway. And instead of being grateful, you treated it like a threat. He didn't answer. He didn't have one. Fix it, Elise said simply, then turned back toward the house. He stayed outside until dawn. The rain stopped, replaced by fog rolling over the vineyard. The world looked washed clean, but he felt heavier than ever. When he finally went inside, the wedding hall was empty. A few staff members nodded to him as they packed the last of the decorations. On the floor, near where Anna had been sitting earlier, lay one of her earrings, a small gold drop, simple and understated. He picked it up and turned it over in his palm. By the time he reached his room, the sun had started to rise. The city boy who had built empires by morning meetings and strategic deals now stood alone, holding a reminder of the only thing he hadn't been able to control. He sat on the edge of his bed, the sound of rain replaced by birds outside. He could fix his company, his reputation, even his family's gossip. But the space Anna left behind felt like something permanent, a silence that echoed louder than any scandal. He realized then that he hadn't lost control. He'd lost the one person who made him want to. Shaw did not sleep. Dawn came too bright, and the quiet of the cleared reception felt like accusation. He moved through rooms that still smelled of wine and flowers, clutching the small gold earring Anna had dropped, the metal warm from where she'd worn it. Elise caught him in a study and said what everyone else was thinking without the polish. You hurt her, Shaw. And for what? So people won't gossip about you for one night. Her voice had the flat edge of someone who'd lost patience with performance. He had no clever answer. He sat, hands together, and admitted how he'd traded risk for an arrangement instead of facing the one mess he could never model into profit. Those words landed and changed everything. In the long, quiet hours, he finally measured the cost, not in headlines but in a single human face. He remembered how she'd steadied conversations, how she'd listened instead of calculating a response. He thought about the contract he'd signed and how neat it had made his conscience feel. The contract could be cancelled, reversed, rewritten. What he had done to someone's dignity could not be waved away by legalese. The realization was small and brutal. For the first time he understood that avoiding humiliation for himself had meant humiliating someone else. He left rooms that had once been comfort and walked the same path she had walked earlier, toward the cottages, toward empty air and the damp tracks where her feet had pressed the ground. He sat where she'd sat, fingers tight around nothing, and tried to imagine walking back inside and saying something that would undo more than it had created. The sun moved, and he felt the ground they'd stood on shift beneath him. If he went back in suited and smooth, words would sound like a polished apology. He needed more than a line. He needed truth, which was risk and exposure and a willingness to be wrong in public. He made one call, a private one, then another, and then he stood and gathered himself like a man preparing to leave a life he'd carefully curated. He would go back not as the CEO who managed impressions, but as someone who had to try to repair the only thing no ledger could restore. How do you admit you were wrong when everything you've built depends on being right? If honesty costs you reputation, is it still worth telling the truth? Drop your thought in the comments section. Let's continue. The reception was folding into a routine when Shaw stepped into the room with a still wet shirt and a face that looked as if sleep had left him unfinished. He waited until Elise rose to toast and then drew a breath that steadied like a decision. He took the microphone. The chatter thinned because he had authority, yes, but more important, his voice had a tone no public statement ever had before, raw and personal. "There's something I need to say," he began. He did not begin with legal disclaimers or defenses. He said what had happened simply. He had hired Anna to be his date. Then he said what no script could require. He had been wrong about what that arrangement could mean. Between pretending and watching her hold the room, I stopped pretending, he said. The room weighted itself around the sentence. He spoke about what he'd learned in small, stubborn pieces, how she'd shown patience, how she'd corrected his assumptions without condescension, how the nights rehearsed in conference rooms had nothing on a single evening full of honest, unscripted moments. Then he did what he knew might look dramatic and needed to be. He called to his assistant, asked that the contract terms be voided immediately. He announced it out loud so nothing would be misread as theater. Cancel her contract. Effective now. Cameras shifted. Conversations stilled. He turned and his eyes found Anna in the doorway, her hands clenched at her sides, the storm of that night still visible on her face. "You don't owe me anything," he told her plainly when he reached her. "But I owe you honesty." He stepped forward and let the words he'd been keeping out of habit land where they might. "I love you, not because you were part of my plan, but because the time I spent with you was the clearest thing in a night that tried to mean otherwise." The room held and then leaned like board members listening to a decision that mattered beyond numbers. Some guests gasped. Others murmured. A few studied his face as if attempting to find the hidden clause. Elise watched with a softness that surprised him, her expectation of performance replaced by a sibling's quiet hope. Veronica watched with an expression that had always been easy to read. She catalogued the moment, seeking leverage where none remained. Anna's posture changed. For the first time since the accusation, she seemed to weigh this man not as a contractor but as a person exposing himself. Halfway through this confession, The camera would cut to a close-up of a hand, a small sign in the crowd, or a whispered exchange. Details for later. For now, everything focused on the difficult pivot of a man choosing messy truth over tidy image. Will truth be enough to bridge what ambition broke? Mid-resolution soft reminder. If you're enjoying this story, like and subscribe for more stories like this. Can a single public confession heal what public humiliation destroyed? Drop your thought in the comments section. Let continue. Silence stretched after he spoke, the moment fragile and dangerous because it could break either way. Anna stood, breath shallow with shock and the echo of pain. "You don't get to fix this with words, Shaw," she said, and the bluntness of it hit him harder than any public criticism. He did not try to polish the moment. "I'm not fixing it," he said. "I'm fighting for it." That was all he could honestly promise in a room where promises were usually made and broken by contracts. He told her why he'd done what he'd done, trying to avoid family pressure, and then he told her what he'd learned, that managing outcomes had cost him living outcomes, and that he had mistaken control for safety. He did not use metaphors. He spoke of the simple facts of his actions and the consequences. "If you walk away," he said, voice steady, "I will respect it. But I need you to know that no company metric, no board vote, no headline will ever matter more than this." The admission was dangerous because it could be accepted or rejected with equal force. Anna's face registered anger, then hurt, then something that looked like calculation. She considered the cost of staying with the man who'd hired her, of living with a memory of humiliation, of trusting a vulnerability that had arrived late. She thought of her business, her dignity, of the people who depended on her. She thought how simple it would be to leave and never look back. She thought of the way he had actually looked at her earlier that week, without a business lens, without a timetable, and that memory did not disappear. For a long breath, she considered the possibility of belief. She stepped forward. The crowd seemed to step back, giving space to two people to decide something private in public. "You're impossible," she said, a small smile breaking truthfully through hurt. He had heard that before, and every time it softened the seriousness of his own armor. He reached for her hand like a man requesting permission. The choice was not about drama now, but about whether either of them would let fear decide for them again. When she placed her hand in his, the applause that followed felt both spontaneous and awkward. People always reacted to a neat ending before understanding the work it would require. They kissed, yes, but the kiss was not the end so much as a marker that both agreed to attempt a new, uncertain start. What price will they pay to turn a public spectacle into a private life? After a public apology and a risky confession, can trust be rebuilt without erasing what broke it? Drop your thought in the comments section. Let continue. 6 months after the vineyard and the storm and the confession, Anna stood at the center of a new event. Her own gala, a charity night she'd battled months to organize. The room glowed with flattering light, guests murmured, and her team moved like a well-drilled unit. She had made choices that lifted her business from precarious to promising. Steady clients, a small grant, and a reputation that now included resilience. She moved through the crowd with the calm authority of someone who had earned her place. Shaw arrived later, not as a headline maker but as a quiet presence in a dark suit. He watched her from the doorway, not to command but to support. He had changed too, less because of a public moment and more because he had learned to accept discomfort in exchange for being seen. When a journalist approached and said, "Is it true your story began with a contract?" he let a small laugh escape. "It began with a contract, yes," he said. "But none of us lives on contracts alone." The line was true and small, and Anna liked its blunt honesty. During the event, Anna moved to the stage to thank donors and supporters. Her speech was brief. She credited her team, her mentors, and the people who'd chosen her when she'd been uncertain. She did not make their past the headline. After the gala, Shaw found her at a quiet balcony overlooking the city lights. They spoke of small, ordinary things: a delivery problem, a misprinted invitation, a grateful phone call from an artist they had helped. The ordinary felt sacred to them now. She teased him about still owing her a dance. He took her hand and they moved to the few notes of a closing song. It was simple: no cameras, no gestures written for an audience. He leaned in and whispered, "Best investment I ever made," and the words landed without artifice. She laughed softly, slid her fingers through his, and when they kissed, it felt like two people choosing a future in private. They left the gala together, heading toward a life that would still hold complications and public interest, but also work in small tasks and trust building that could not be measured by columns in a ledger. The camera might capture their steps, the world might comment, and some nights would still demand explanation. But tonight, under the city's steady glow, they had made the choice to keep trying. Is a life rebuilt from a mistake stronger because of the risk it took to become honest? Tell us where you're watching from, subscribe for more powerful stories, and stay tuned because tomorrow we'll drop another story you won't want to miss. Your support helps us keep bringing you these stories.